wanted to start with intros and acknowledgements. Grateful for the Indigenous land of the Chumash and Tongva people to hold space for us today together. And yes, something that was challenging for me, and I know for all of us together here today, is to also acknowledge all the protests that are happening in the city, and that we stand in solidarity with all the communities who are under attack right now, even if we're not able to join the protest right now. The people and their safety are with me, and I know with all of us today. So however we need to bring them in and bring in what is happening their space. And before we begin, is I wanted to go around and for us to just even say our name and offer a gift. And that gift can look in all sorts of ways. I'm pulling from Indigenous feminist praxis and thinking about moments when we cannot give back the land that does not belong to us. What can we give? What can we offer to this space? Welcome. So that can look like curiosity or care or presence. Thank you for coming. So if we can just go around, it doesn't have to be an extensive introduction, but since it's a small group, just sharing our name and what is the gift that we're bringing in with us today. So my name is Silvi, and the gift we're bringing in today is humbleness and presence.
My name is Ricky. My gift is I'm a photographer. I'd like to take photos with airline here if you want.
Hi everyone, I'm Linda. The gift that I'm bringing might be curiosity and openness to learn more about everything.
Hi everyone, my name is Vicky, and I think similarly to you, Silvi, in my gifts today I offer presence, being present here, and then also solidarity with everyone else, like on a global scale.
Someone just walked in the door open slightly.
I'm Ramona, and I guess I'm bringing some fun to the table, just a little bit of energy, I guess.
Love that.
Yeah.
Trevor is my name, and active listening is a gift I can bring.
I like that. My name is Kamala. I'm bringing. I also wanted to listen very carefully, but I think I will bring my imagination.
Hi, I'm Isabella, and I'm bringing hope and optimism.
Ooh.
Taking some.
Hi everyone, my name is Sam, and I'm bringing care and joy.
I'm Sarah, and I'm bringing a lot of gratitude for everyone coming to this and for Silvi for making this happen and being part of all of it. Yeah.
We're just introducing ourselves.
I'm like usually the first person in places. I'm like, damn it, I'm the last one here.
You were.
You're
the perfect time.
It's not very far.
We're just introducing ourselves and sharing sort of what is the gift that we're bringing into this space together today. And it may be an ephemeral gift, but just however you want to answer that.
My name is Courtney, and I'm bringing the good vibes.
Yes.
It sounds like some kind of meeting. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, just a little outline of what it is that we're doing here today. So I'm bringing in sort of a practice from my other collaborations with Radical Sense, which is a feminist reading group that happens in Albania and the diaspora. And so today we're going to collectively read Jose Esteban Mun's text called Ephemera as Evidence, Introductory Notes to Queer Acts from 2016. It's a short text. I think it's going to take us maybe like half an hour. I can start with reading the text. You can read as much and as little. It can be a sentence, it could be a paragraph, and then you say pass, and we just move on from there. If you don't feel like reading, you say pass. However you feel comfortable. So yeah, the idea is that we share a conversation on how the ideas that show up in the text and the methods are reflected in the Feminist Center archive, which is part of what is on the table and some on the stands there for the 10-year anniversary. And thinking about how some of the ideas that Munoz talks about connect to queer feminist praxis and methods that may be useful in each of our practices. It may not be what sort of aligns with my practice or Sarah's. And then we can share a collective conversation. Sarah and I have some questions that we will tease out, but that doesn't mean that, right, that's why even the room is organized in such a way that it's a circle so that all of us are having these conversations together. So even though I may have some questions here, it doesn't mean that it's going to be some rigid form of discussion. So Jose Esteban Mun was born in 1967 and passed in 2013. He was a Cuban-American academic. He wrote a lot about the field of performance studies, visual art, queer theory, cultural studies, and critical theory. And he was chair and professor at the Department of Performance Studies at the Tisch School at NYU. Some of his notable works, which all of his works are really central to a lot of my practice, one of them being Disidentification from 1999 and Cruising Utopia from 2009. The text that we're reading today sort of came up for me during the program that I'm in Global Studies at UCI, where I just finished my first year in the PhD program. And this was coming from, thank you, this was coming from a class that was called Problems in Feminist Praxis and Feminist Research. So I'm very curious to open up some of these ideas together. And it was around messy archives and the archive, how do we address the archive as a body and the body as an archive. Hence, having the conversation with Sarah, who is the founder of the Feminist Center and has maybe some of these ephemeral or some of these traces that Munoz talks about are held within her own body.
You might know about feminist problems.
So that's just a little introduction, and I'm happy to start with the reading, and we can move around this way. Does anybody feel okay to read aloud together? Yes? Okay, perfect. Yes?
Do you have another?
Yes, there is.
Is there not one better?
But also, yeah, we can also share. Yeah,
Sharing.
Yeah, okay. Let me know how to put it on.
But yeah, before you leave, you can also print it and share. Yes. Yeah, and Courtney, I was just saying that the meeting, our gathering today is being recorded, and I hope that is
Via audio.
okay. And maybe just a disclosure that this is, I've been doing these conversations in my curatorial practice for many years now, and I feel like I just always wanted to record them so I could share them with other folks. And that's how Queer Acts Radio, which is what the sort of like excuse for gathering is around, and Queer Acts is coming from, being pulled directly from this text by Munoz. And also the abbreviation of it, QAR, is sort of refers to two words in Albanian. One is chark, which means circle, so gathering, and the other one is tier, so crying, which
Perfect. More advocator of tears, but as this moment of ephemera as well. So, okay, enough of my chatter. So I will begin and we go from there. Ephemera is Evidence, Introductory Notes to Queer Acts by Jose Esteban Mun. Queer Evidence. The picture on the cover of this special issue of Women in Performance is taken from an untitled series of photographs by conceptual artist Tony Just. The larger project that this elegant image is culled from centers on a complex understanding and enactment of performance. Tony just visited a rundown public men's room, a tea room where public sex flourishes. He scrubbed and sanitized the space, laboring to make it look pristinely, shimmeringly clean. The result is a photograph that indexes not only the haunted space and spectral bodies of those anonymous sex acts and Just's performance after them, but also his act of documentation. This extended performance is, in multiple ways, an exemplary queer act. It accesses a hidden queer history of public sex outside the dominant public sphere's visible historical narratives. It taps into the life world of tea room sex, a space that is usually only shadowed in semi-publicness, and makes this space legible outside of its insular sphere. But it does this through negation, through a process of erasure that redoubles and marks a systematic erasure of minoritarian histories. While seriously engaged in establishing an archive of queerness, it simultaneously disrupts the very notion of officially subsidized and substantiated institutions. Showing this ethereal image to my friends and colleagues registered yet another reason why the act and its visual traits are queer. While a few people recognized the image as that of a toilet bowl, many saw it as breasts, some only as a nipple, others as an anus, and still others as a belly button. It is not an image that is epistemologically framed and grounded, but instead it is performatively polyvalent. The fundamental indeterminacy of this image made me feel that its ephemerality and its sense of possibility were profoundly queer. Pass.
Central to performance scholarship is a queer impulse that intends to discuss an object whose ontology, in its inability to come as a proper proof, is profoundly queer. The notion of queer acts that is openly as it hopes to offer is immediately linked to a belief in the performative as an
The notion of queer acts that this opening essay hopes to offer is immediately linked to a belief in the performative as an intellectual and discursive occasion for a queer world-making project. Thus, I want to propose queerness as a possibility, a sense of self-knowing, a mode of sociality and relationality. Queerness is often transmitted covertly. This has everything to do with the fact that leaving too much of a trace has often meant that the queer subject has left herself open for attack. Instead of being clearly available as visible evidence, queerness has instead existed as innuendo, gossip, fleeting moments, and performances that are meant to be interacted with by those within its epistemological sphere, while evaporating at the touch of those who would element queer possibility. Tony Just's images are emblematic of the kind of invisible evidence which I will proceed to unpack as an ephemera. Queer acts like queer performances and various performances of queerness stand as evidence of queer lives, powers, and possibilities.
In the spirit of queer acts, I am less interested in telling readers what the performatively polyvalent writings that follow say, and more invested in gesturing to the work that these writings do. Therefore, this essay will focus more on situating this volume within a larger institutional frame, elaborating the ideological grain that these writings work against, than on introducing or setting up the work that follows. I want to explain some of the ways in which critical writing and scholarship that address and enact queer phenomena, ontologies, politics, or styles are attacked by homophobic and conservative forces. These resistances, attacks, and contestations of queer and other modalities of minoritarian work often follow predictable patterns of assault. With increasing frequency, queer and race scholarship, like feminist inquiry before it, are dismissed as merely passing intellectual fancies, modes of inquiry that are too much in the now, lacking historical grounding and conceptual staying power. Because the archives of queerness are makeshift and randomly organized, due to the restraints historically shackled upon minoritarian cultural workers, the right is able to question the evidentiary authority of queer inquiry. All of this amounts to a general critique of queer scholarship's claim to rigor. A question: who owns rigor? I suggest that rigor is owned, made, and deployed through institutional ideology. This essay will attempt to interrupt the regime of rigor, to make this dominant institutional ideology visible. In what follows, I will also consider the ways in which the writings that are collected in this volume resists the protocols of rigor, as it has been traditionally manufactured. This is not to say that the work contained in this volume does not perform at high levels of precision and critical cogency. Instead, this volume documents, accounts for, and finally performs what we are calling queer acts. Queer acts, I would suggest, contest and rewrite the protocols of critical writing. Thus, the threads of commonality connecting these essays are not only their focus on queer phenomena, but their own status of queer acts.
Okay. Rigor mortis. During this national and institutional moment backlash, certain modalities of self-enactment, both political and professional, have fallen under attack by institutionally sanctioned arbiters of good writing, good scholars, and good work. Work and thinking that does not employ and subscribe to traditionalist scholarly archives and methodologies are increasingly viewed as being utterly without merit. Work that attempts to index the anecdotal, the performative, or what I am calling the ephemeral, is proof, is often undermined by the Academy's officiating structures. This is true despite the fact that, on the level of publishing and not much else, alterity is currently in vogue. This trend does not really translate into validation of non-traditional critical work in other aspects of the institutional matrix, fellowships, tenure, promotion, funding, etc. I cannot begin to count the times I have been advised, or I've advised friends, colleagues, and students to make their projects look straighter, conservative in thematics, and rigorous in methodology. Rarely do I suggest that someone queer up their application for a fellowship or play up the heuristic or performative dimensions of a book proposal. Academically and institutionally, the communities of scholars that I live in are often in the position of ideologically and theoretically dressing down. When we emphasize the experimental, heuristic, and performative aspects of our work, we sometimes deploy the anecdotal in hope of conveying a point that is not backed up by routinized understandings of proper evidence. We do so knowing that we are leaving ourselves open to charges of being ahistorical or flimsy. This critique is elaborated in Heather Dubrow's introduction to recent PMLA issue about the status of evidence, in which she examines the power of proof, as opposed to the power of a certain kind of performance which silences demands for real evidence. In fact, she goes so far to suggest that often performance functions as an alternative to the presentation of evidence. Discussing the different connotations of solid as a style of scholarship in the US, Canada, and Great Britain, she concludes that those who write and praise criticism that courts the label solid The courts that label solid pride themselves in such works, unlike concoctions from French ovens, will not collapse for years after it is prepared and cannot, under any circumstances, be described as light or flaky. Pass.
Dubrow's essay is an ambitious attempt to bridge a gap between different generational investments in evidence. The binary that she establishes between solid, older scholars and less than solid, yet powerful younger scholars, is one that she does not worry or challenge. In an essay that intends evenly to map out both sides of the debate, she portrays her mistrust of performance, anything that we might understand as unsolid or ephemeral. At the center of Dubrow's essay is a belief that I once remarked as complicit with a dominant institutional logic, an imperative to maintain the stability of evidence, despite the acknowledgement that evidence is always already contingent under the pressure of post-structuralist and post-axiological inquiry. Dubrow insists on the need for rigorous deployment of evidentiary procedure grounded in material reality. For Dubrow, if our work wants to avoid the fate of being light and flaky, it must follow rigorous patterns in its presentation and deployment. This dominant impulse in the profession marks the ways some of us claim alterity in our political scholarship as improper and inappropriate writing, practice, and theory making. In the same issue of PMLA, Dubrow participates in a roundtable on evidence, a statement by Sue Hutchins. In this discussion sheds valuable light on some of the intrinsic problems of evidence for a minoritarian subject who must choose from different categories of identity and evidence. At this point, I wish issues of race, particularly Blackness, and issues of queerness meet. In fact, those kind of experimental stories are called into question. For example, if a Caribbean woman reveals herself as a lesbian, others look for ways in which she is foreign to the Caribbean because one can't be African or African American within the Caribbean hemisphere at least, and lesbian at the same time. A question in discussion of some of Michelle Cliff's work is how autobiographical it can be. What is evidence? If something is evidence of her queerness, it's evidence she's not Black. If it's evidence of her Blackness, clearly she's not queer. It's investing to ask what her homosexuality does to validate her evidence. Hutchins usefully points to the ways in which evidence fails to account for Hutchins usefully points to the ways in which evidence fails to account for the points of interaction within different minoritarian identity practices.
The late Marlon Riggs assessed an archive that was ephemeral as opposed to traditionally evidentiary to resist the trap that Hutchins describes. Self is not argued and asserted in Riggs' work by the mandate to provide evidence, but it is instead fleshed out in the groundbreaking Tongues Untied and in his tour de force finale, Black Is, Black Ain't, through a powerful and calculated set of deployments of ephemeral witnessing to Black queer identity. Both videos weave together disparate fabrics that would, if considered as emanating from discrete archives, clash. The videos continue Riggs' snap diva virtuosity made manifest in different performances, the poetry and music of other queer Black men and stories, remembrances of growing up queer in heterosexual Black America and Black in the lily white Castro. Riggs' collage effect challenges the protocol of evidence, and in doing so makes possible the enactment of a Black and queer life world that cannot be upheld by a foundation as unsympathetic as a rigorously enforced archive. His work stands in direct defiance to calls for a return to real evidence. The presentation of this sort of anecdotal and ephemeral evidence grants entrance and access to those who have been locked out of official histories and, for that matter, material reality. Evidence's limit becomes clearly visible when we attempt to describe and imagine contemporary identities that do not fit into a pre-established archive of evidence. Many of the articles contained in this volume are by scholars who insist, in the first moment of their critical project, on not dislodging queerness from race and ethnicity. Yes.
Ephemera and feeling. The notion of ephemera as evidence that I suggest in the title of this piece is nothing like a smooth linkage. I want to take some time to reflect on what I'm calling ephemera as modality of anti-rigor and anti-evidence that, far from filtering materiality out of cultural studies, reformulates and expands our understandings of materiality. Ephemera, as I'm using it here, is linked to alternate modes of textuality and narrativity, like memory and performance. It is all of those things that remain after a performance, a kind of evidence of what has transpired, but certainly not the thing itself. It does not rest on epistemological foundations, but is instead interested in following traces, glimmers, residues, and specks of things. It is important to note that ephemera is a mode of proofing, and producing arguments often worked by minoritarian culture and criticism makers. Raymond Williams' influential and oft-cited notion of structures of feeling helps further our understanding of the material dimensions of ephemera. Williams explains the ways in which art conveys, translates, and engenders structures of feelings, tropes of emotion and lived experience that are indeed material without necessarily being solid. For Williams, a structure of feeling is a process of relating the continuity of social formations within a work of art. A closer consideration of Williams' thesis helps explain the ways ephemera does not forget materiality, but rather refashions it. The hypothesis has a special relevance to art and literature where true social content is in a significant number of cases of this present and effective kind, which cannot be reduced to belief systems, institutions, or explicit general relationships, though it may include all these as lived and experienced, with or without tension, as it also evidently includes elements of social or material, physical or natural, experience, which may lie beyond or be uncovered or imperfectly covered by the elsewhere recognizable systemic elements.
Williams' formula is calibrated to maintain the ephemeral aspects of culture's particularities, its specific dealings, specific rhythms. Ephemera is always about specificity and resisting dominant systems of aesthetic and institutional classification, without abstracting them outside of social experience and a larger notion of sociality. Ephemera, and especially the ephemeral work of structures of feeling, is firmly anchored within the social. Ephemera includes traces of lived experience and performances of lived experience, maintaining experiential and significations the text produces, offered by Sylvia Winters, the Caribbean novelist and critic. She writes,
Oh, I think I might have signature page wrong. It's it's 10:11. Thank you. No, I mean that's probably
Like,
where
do you want to continue on page 11? Did we miss? Oh, there's. Yeah, I think it's now right here. Apologies. Like, where were we before?
over here.
So you're here. So lived experiences, maintaining experiential
policies, and urgencies.
Thank you. Yeah.
And urgencies long after these structures of feeling have been lived. Queerness, too, can be understood as a structure of feeling. Since queerness has not been let to stand unassailed in the mass public sphere, it has often existed and circulated as a shared structure of feeling that encompasses same-sex desire and other minoritarian sexualities, but also holds other dissident affective relationships to different aspects of the sex-gender system. Pass.
My definition of ephemera is influenced by Paul Gilmore's reading of Vintage Soul, R&B, and punk album covers as a part of the exchange of ephemera that connects and makes concert a community like the Black Atlantic. In this volume, Michael Moon's powerful essay on Joseph Cornell's boxes shows us a cultural worker whose relation to ephemeral objects in part constitutes his queerness. I also need to include the residue of different live performances in the public sphere, performances with powerful world-making capabilities. A writerly relation to ephemera inhabits this collection. Many contributors explore modes of anecdotal, performative writing practices that index different experiences and memories of self. For example, Robert and Forrest Dinge takes the theory project to critical registers that shed all abstracting mechanisms around sex, sexuality, and theories of Owen's abstracted I. Reedford makes palatable the material dimensions of sex, race, and power through his considered performative writing strategy, surpassing epistemology, doing and deciphering. In this essay, I have tried to indicate the forces that stand in the humanitarian subject's path when she or he attempts to enact counterpublics through alternative modes of culture making and intellectual work to explicate the ideological underpinnings of discourse, of rigor and evidence, and to understand their roles in maintaining certain protocols and conventions. This is not to suggest that the humanitarian subject has some primary or a priori relation to ephemera, memory, performativity, or the anecdotal. Instead, I have tried to call attention to the efficacy and indeed the necessity of such strategies of self-enactment for the humanitarian subject. Those who deploy rigor and certify evidence have stakes in the maintenance of critical and academic protocols that are most certainly not about rigors for rigor's sake. These notes are meant to open up a space for the writing that follows, writing that makes rigor and questions what an archive is. I'm reminded of the call for decipherment as opposed to interpretation, the play of meanings and significations a text produces, offered by Sylvia Winters, the Caribbean novelist and critic. She writes, rather than seeking to rhetorically demystify, the deciphering term seeks to decipher what process of rhetorical mystification does. It seeks to identify not what texts and their signifying practices can be interpreted to mean, but what it can be deciphered to do. It also seeks to evaluate the illocutionary force and procedures with which they do what they do. Pass.
The writing that composes this volume is much more calibrated to meditate on what a queer act does, performatively and in turn socially, than what it might mean. Performance studies as a modality of inquiry can surpass the play of interpretation and the limits of epistemology and open new ground by focusing on what acts and objects do in a social matrix rather than what they might possibly mean. It is in this spirit, the spirit of doing queerness, of what Parker rightfully calls praxis, and perhaps making queer worlds, that these queer acts of thinking, scholarship, writing, and performance are offered. This essay is intended to do the double work of being a self-contained contribution to this collection, as well as serve as an introduction to the other writings here. Thus far, I've tried to resist the introduction writing protocol of summarizing essays. While I have already gestured to several pieces because they are particularly relevant to my argument, it is clear that all of this work contests the regime of rigor. Indeed, there is something about introducing them that profoundly goes against the ethos of a queer act. Instead of the usual round of glosses, I will briefly touch on some of the writings that I have yet to evoke in an effort to display this issue's diversity of approaches, styles, and identifications. We see the way in which the kernel of queerness is present in acts we don't normally see as queer. For example, in The Wedding that Elizabeth Freeman expertly reads in her textual analysis of The Member of the Wedding. The nuanced queerness of lesbian acts, mass-produced for straight male consumption in All-Girl Action, is ironized in June Wright's essay, which playfully assumes the position of the phallic spectator, displacing and replacing the only dick. Andrew Parker's compelling meditation on the relation between performance, praxis, and Marxism unpacks another long overlooked trace of the queer. Parker's hypothesis that the relation between praxis and performativity might actually be constitutive of praxis is more than suggestive. It is also an act that unravels a certain queerness within a conceptual and institutional terrain that has not been generative of queer possibility.
Judith Halberstam's work reminds us that even a queer archive can stand to be pushed beyond its parameters. Halberstam repositions the routinely excluded and often objected stone butch in the archive of a lesbian history that has cast her as a bad object. Her work also traces ephemeral strands of stone butchness in a way that challenges all narratives, histories, and theories of lesbianism, butch femme, and ultimately gender. Many of the writings between these pages render institutional landscapes where queer acts transpire and often unexpectedly flourish. This would include the Girl Scout camp that Katie Kant writes, remembers, and reenacts, with all its limits and possibilities subtly drawn. Other cities are more imaginable as breeding grounds for queer acts, like the Chelsea Stone gay male bar Splash that Johnny McGrath describes. McGrath's article traces not only the more apparently queer acts of soapy men dancing for other men in public showers, but also poignantly the almost conterminous queer acts of surveillance, identification, and disidentification. Yves Kosofsky's Sedgwick's Pandas in Trees wondrously depicts the queer spaces of trees tops, sandboxes, and a dusty yard, locations that are temporal spaces where queerness often rules and where the very queer performance of childhood is housed. Staces Wolf's important work on the star iconography and history of Mary Martins also reminds us the way in which bodies, in this case, a star body injected with star power, in a queer site in its own right. Richard Fung's thoughtful appraisal of Shani Mutu's fanatic of finding a displaced body at home called attention to the fact that finding a space for the enactment of the queer self can in itself be a queer act. The video performances render such a search visible. Cynthia Fuchs's notion of performative queerness in the performances of the artist formerly known as is situated at one of those dense transfer points where the act successfully negotiates when epistemology falters. What Fuchs identifies as the ambiguity of the once prints, the unexplored spaces between expressions, the possibilities of movement, the non-names not imagined, resonates with the key words of this article as the ephemeralness of While much of queer theories fixated on pastiche and parody, a deadly impulse towards stale seriousness has kept the production of theory that performs parody from being imaginable. Lisa Duggan and Kathleen McHugh, in a lauded theory-making intervention that adds both wit and wisdom to the project, make sure not to rest on the epistemological trapdoor of identity and instead talk about femme in a vernacular equally lurid and laughing. Femme or femme, or me. In the performativity, the insecurity, the mockery, the derision of foreplay, the bet, the dare, the bringing to attention of the suitor, the one who would provide her pleasure, in an alternative universe, a different place and time, maybe a Paris in the 70s that actually possessed a sense of humor. This essay would be called The Left of the Femme. Would you like to continue?
Latina studies foundational thinker Gloria Anzaldúa is given a circle attention she richly deserves and is often denied by Marcus Emery, who consider the way in which she functions with a matrix of sexuality, gender, Latinity, and nation. The negotiation of these identificatory coordinates is negated by queer performance, a performativity that retains the specificity of Anzaldúa's many identities. Alberto Sandoval is at Naçi Sternbach offer a encumbered consideration of work of Marga Gomez, a major player in the world of Latina performance, who researched, rehearsed, and produced a self at somewhat similar crossroads of identity. Both these articles, especially taken together, make an important contribution of Latina studies, surpassing reductive incentiveness versus anti-incentiveness, polemics, and incentivizing the utility of performativity of any civilizations of Latinidad. Pass.
Barbara Browning's essay attends to the importance, power, and necessity of ephemeral materials for AIDS pedagogy in the Brazilian community. This generative text also acts queerness through a meticulous and marvelously crafted prose that is calibrated in the interstices among ethnography, cultural studies, and performance studies. Finally, Queer Acts brings to mind an important moment in the text that is arguably one of the queer theory's most relevant precursors. The history of sexuality. Michael Foucault writes, sodomy was a category of forbidden acts. The perpetrator was nothing more than subject of them. 1978-43. The work collected here aims to displace tyranny of identity and instead to think about acts. Foucault, Just's cover image, desires and dreams about a moment when refined identities, the universe of overdetermined presence, could be dissolved for a new and yet prior notion of acts. Foucault's investigations into a time and place before the regime of identity is propelled by longing for a utopia figured in the past that critiques the present. His project stresses the centrality of acts over the dead, and that is epistemology. Reconsidered decades later, we return to the slogan, acts, not identities. And with that said, I would add queer acts.
Thank you. Great job. Yeah. How did it feel? Maybe. Thank you for me. Maybe before jumping into questions, how did that land for everybody? Maybe we can just air out some things that have stayed with you, or
It felt like grad school. It felt like big ass birds. I'm like, listen, I haven't had enough coffee for this. We're like all slaved up and stuff. I know.
Or it's a lot of us were doing great, but never.
In my head, I know it's like out loud. Like, I see this out loud.
minoritarian term I have never thought.
But then, like, I remember like, oh, I haven't read out loud in so long. It's like I did miss this. I'm like, fuck, it's been like 8 years.
And just how like the ephemeral traces actually show up within like the body of the reader in like missing those moments, or like the glitches that actually happen.
And it's also just cool to hear his voice.
Oh yeah.
Like the same voice of the writer, but the different voices of the speakers.
Yeah, I guess also the symbol where you were that was
Yeah, maybe we like perform that symbol.
I think at one point he did say what it was. but
Really haven't.
So I feel like he did say that.
Yeah, because I think we read it as the artist formerly known.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what it's called.
But I don't know like what we call it.
Anything else people wanna? I mean, I love to talk about rigor and how it's like institutionally oppressive and how it will be redefined in this book that we then don't read.
Yeah. I wonder if where maybe you want to start.
That's a good starting point because I think I have a lot of I think I like caught myself in that because I think sometimes rigor is a word I use or use internally or use around here in meaning like a seriousness or an intentionality or a reasoning, a clear set of reasoning for doing things that isn't necessarily, I think for me sometimes on the more administrative end of things as like if you don't need to necessarily be professional or like professionalized, but I want to be rigorous in my like reasons for doing things. But then I like being, I was like, oh, maybe rigor is like this idea of institution, like rigor being a, I don't know, reinforcer of like the institution and like I like the alternative of queer acts instead. And I think it made me want to read the rest of it and feel like, how do we think about that and define that and like practice that?
Well, rereading it together today, I thought also about maybe the moments when perhaps you're feeling like, oh, I have to be rigorous or I'm expecting some kind of rigor, and then the rigor that you're met with and the ephemerality or the traces in between your rigor and an understanding of someone else's rigor that become these ephemeral traces or glimmers that he was talking about.
Totally, yes.
Sort of these like almost like interactional residues, like what is left behind between your understanding of a rigor versus someone else's rigor.
Yeah, and because I think working with artists, there's often a lot of like rigor in the practice that is not, I wouldn't say it's necessarily like institutionalized rigor.
Yeah, Vicky and I were talking about this yesterday because we kept looking at the etymology of the word rigor to make sure that was it stiffness? What is this? Because you imagined it being something else as well, but we could not locate your definition of it.
Well, I think I thought about rigor almost like a passion, like a state of mind of being passionate about something for a long time. And then, when I think about being rigorous about something, I think about being very thorough, which is like really not at all anything that Google provided as far as like the definition of the word rigor. But I understand how he's contextualizing.
Yeah, but we can take it and do whatever. I mean, the reading really is just to like serve as a sort of like a foundational space for us to then do whatever we want to do.
Yeah.
But also what is coming up now, somehow my dad came to me now because he's very rigorous, and there's this like categorization or a disposition that comes with a kind of rigor that you're trying to embody. And so like you're going from like your own categorizations, somebody else's categorizations of what that looks like. And is there ever spaces of counter categorizations or for queer potentiality to emerge? Maybe that's more a question that happens in dialogue with oneself as you are doing a task or you're asking somebody to do a task, right? Is there wiggle room for rigor to take on different meanings? And happy to hear from you.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm to the ephemera and feeling like this, I think was the like, I don't know, the turn of the key for me on this is that, I mean, I think he is talking about rigor in the sense, like he is talking about it in a very academic and institutionalized way. And I think when we take it outside of that context, there's different possibility there. But he does say, he's like, what I'm calling is ephemera as a modality of anti-rigor and anti-evidence that far from filtering materiality out of culture studies, reformulates and expands our understanding of materiality. Ephemera, as I'm using it here, is linked to alternative modes of textuality and narrativity like memory and performance. And I think, I guess, I think I get what he's saying, that like instead of like proof or written proof of things, that there can be these other ways of like knowing and understanding and creating. narrative around things. And I think that, yeah, I was like, and I'm like, yeah, definitely here. I think thinking about the archive of like,
Well, I love that you're also bringing up memory. That takes me to this question of memory as ephemera, as like when he says the fundamental indeterminacy of the image, or this evidence of it's not the thing that transpired, it's the thing in between, the thing that we don't account for. Yeah. And so there's this like slipperiness that shows up there, like this eluding meaning, like escaping meaning. And so they're thinking of accessibility of knowledge when organizing, for example, think about the Feminist Center. And maybe my question here is like, what are some glimmers in the history of the Feminist Center that only live in your memory? Because also, the desire for me to like start these segments with you is because you've been since the beginning, and the center has changed names, and there's one sort of ways in which we have access to the archive by being here or visiting the LACA archive or coming to different programming, but then there's all the spaces in between that live in your body. Yeah. And I wonder if there's any glimmers that you want to share.
That's a nice question. I think so much of it, I think that's what's been difficult about how to, when we've been putting together the archive and gathering all the materials and like documenting them, it's just, it's so hard to like paint any sort of sense of like an entire picture of what's been going on here. It's like a lot of them are design materials that were made before an event, before anything even happened there. And so much of what makes up like, I think the work or the importance or anything that anyone's like particularly attracted to about being around here is like very relational and like experiential, and about part we've been talking a lot about like to really reap the benefits of this is like there has to be a pretty high level of like participation or like a willingness to participate, I think, to like really take anything away. And it's nearly impossible, I think, to reflect some of that in like an archive, even a sort of like archive that's not particularly interested in being like super rigorous. And that's open to having lots of different types of weird things in it, like LACA is and has been with us. Like it's just still so hard. That relational aspect of it feels like impossible to reflect. And it's like, and I think something I've been thinking of too is like in an idea that one day I might not be here. Is that like how do you externalize some of those, the information and the relationships and the stories and in a way that makes sense to anyone else or can be. And I think, I don't know, like I think I'm okay with like the impossibility of it because it does feel like it's this like much broader network of like knowing and
almost like in your own body that you're resisting that categorization or having to place it in some kind of language. I remember when I was visiting the archives preparing for these gatherings together, spending time with Alexis at the archive, and she would say to me, there's this moment where she's archiving materials from the archives, but there'll be something on the page or a trace or some foldiness or something in the material itself that there was no metadata for to put it down.
Spilled wine.
And she's like, I would just take it then with me. It would sort of like enter her body because it couldn't enter this sort of metadata, and then she would just think about it for a long time.
I love
it. So that brings me to this part of like why we called this gathering together the body as archive and body, and that there's this, or in working with the archive and working with the body, that it asks for this practice of radical empathy, this sort of like remaining open and willing to be changed in relation, whether it's material that does not speak or there's those traces. How do we remain open and willing to be changed by that material? Or also, and maybe what are under what principles are these ephemeral traces then preserved and cared for? That's open to you, that's open to everybody.
Everybody else. I'll think of.
But maybe there's something there like being open and willing to be changed. Do you find yourselves when you're working with archival material or you're visiting archives, how does maybe radical empathy show up when you're in relation to, right, because this is also a body, right, like this is the body of a tree that was killed and transformed. It's in our right, like
Now
we're really
the body of the tree.
we're dealing with bodies. I don't know.
I think that I feel like the only archives that I visit on a regular basis are the June Mazer archives, which are the lesbian archives of West Hollywood. And every time I go, it's just kind of baffling to me, like over and over again, that like queer women have been doing the exact same shit for like decades. Yeah. And it's like, on the one hand, it's very like, you're like, oh, that's cool. There's like a lot of ways that people have invented to take care of each other and to do this thing. At the same time, you're like, it's kind of also depressing that it's like the same problems over and over again that bring people together and then also disband people. Like there's so much, I think when you're talking about radical empathy, I think so much about like how there's so much documentation of people coming together, and people so very rarely document and archive the reasons that they break apart, both personally and in organizations. But like that's also part of the archive, and if you're very carefully piecing things together, you can sort of see where the divergences are and like where the cracks are that break people apart. And I was looking at some newsletter in the 70s, and I noticed that like at one point, I think towards the end of the decade, like they just had like people writing with like really different perspectives in the newsletter, and I was like, oh, this is why it ended. And this was like but I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, I really do empathize with both of these people.
I think also what you're also bringing up, I'm reminded so much of Courtney's work. I know.
Sorry.
Well, you did say yes to coming. Courtney and I went to CalArts together, and yes. But I mean, I'm thinking about your work in like with the photo booth, that even during the pandemic, when all the photo booths and all these queer spaces where you take photos with yourself, being in those in-between spaces, crying, being with yourself, however you want it to be, like your body within this other body, and the photo booth is such a body that holds bodies. But then you went on to create that body in your own home during the pandemic, so that you could continue to make those images. So there's also this like specific place as well of where these traces can exist, right? Because also, yes, you make the photos within the photo booths, but then there's all the other parts, right? Like I always wonder, what is on the floor? What is like the traces on the mirror? What does the fabric look like on the outside? Where's that body relationship to then your room? I mean, we see it, we should all, you know.
They should all work right now.
But also you can go to Courtney's show, which will open this July. But maybe you can share something there, because for you, the archive, there's your body in the archive, then there's the photo booth as the archive, then there's all your photo archives, and recording yourself crying for, I don't know how many years now. 15?
13, 12, 13, since 2013. Every month for at least once a month, so it'd be multiple months since 2013. So from 13 to 2020, like maybe a week or two before we were like locked down, I was doing it in like a public space. And then I was like, I can handle, a month or so. We can do like mid-April. I'm like, oh shit, no, we're gonna be locked away for God knows how long, and I had a mental breakdown. I was like, I'm not ready for this problem to be over. And so my then partner made me a like backdrop that mimicked my favorite backdrop. I talked about it, like the red. I cried, and then another friend mentioned, why not just use a Polaroid or like your phone camera or whatever to mimic that whole thing. So I went through a period of like doing that and like settled on Polaroid, and then realized I can use any camera. And once the world opened up again, I kind of incorporated both of them. But since I'm already talking about this like body of work, when I think archive, like I was cosplaying as a heterosexual, which no one believed. I was like, this is my best performance. I deserve all the Oscars. It's amazing. But it took my first semester, up to my first semester of grad school to kind of like realize like, what the fuck am I doing with the photo booth? Like, why am I doing this? And why am I still doing this? And I was after I mid-res, and I had all this time to do nothing. And I was like, wouldn't it be fun to scan all these things? I hadn't scanned them yet. And like, as I'm scanning them, I realized that like the sparkle in my eye just like wasn't existing until like November of my first semester of grad school. And grad school's hard. I don't know if you guys know this, but like grad school's kind of hard. And I had a lot of breakdowns. I was like, why am I here? And but somehow like in like the first few months, like there was a sparkle in my eye despite being like in a pit of like, I'm gonna drop what I'm doing, I can't do this anymore. And I realized that was when I first came out to myself and like actually meant it. And so leading up to that, I was sitting in the photo booth like, hey dude, what's going on? And like, okay. I'm like, that's not what I'm asking. Like, what's happening in the photo booth? Like, what am I doing? And I realized it was a whole like confessional. I'm not Catholic, I'm Baptist or recovering Baptist, but I have a lot of friends who are Catholics. So I know about the photo booth, I know about the confessional. You walk in the space, you like do your little dance, and you walk on out. Like, I feel redeemed, it's amazing. And so I thought of like, well, I can't be the only like gay person that uses space as like a safe space. And then I did a little dance on the good old Googles and found out that the photo booth was one of the first or one of the only places that queer couples can actually document their love without like the middleman of like taking their cameras over to like one of photo, because if you guys don't know about queer history, it was illegal to be gay. It was like, ooh, bad. And so they were like able to go to these places like, oh, this is my best friend, like we're just going to go to the photo booth and like here's our tricks, and like dude, and like that was a way for them to do that, especially in the military, like that's actually bad. And then Polaroids became a thing where people, and it became, you know, very accessible. So the gays were like, Polaroid camera, this is awesome. Here's our love. And so you go to a gay person's house, there's probably Polaroids or photo strips on their fridge because like, here's our love. And so I was thinking of like, well, these photo booths I visit are in very straight bars. Like not a single gay bar has a fucking photo booth. And it's like, your patrons will pay a lot of money for this. Like, stop it. And so I'm walking through these straight spaces to a photo booth, sometimes crying. I have to like clean up for like bartender, or you know, the bouncer let me in. I'm like, I'm like crying. Walking into these straight spaces to the photo booth to sit and like document my gay ass self, like crying or with lovers or whatever. And like it's a whole thing. Like no one knows what's going on in here because you close your confessional and you're like confessing whatever it is, and you walk on out like I feel great. And so the photo booth itself is like an archive of like whoever, whatever you're going through. Like it's a performance too. Like I'm performing to an audience of 9/1. It's me in the lens, and it looks like also like you're talking to yourself through the. It's a whole little dance.
Sorry, it's so exciting. Because well, I was thinking to yourself, and then like another potential, because I think that goes back to the archive, like another potential future viewer, because there's a part of this like gathering and sharing and saving that you're like, who knows who it's for? Like someone in the future who maybe wants it or needs it or is going to realize, because I think one of the very early, like, I don't know, impulses of that became Women's Center and then Feminist Center was we saw this archival show that was about the historic women's building as part of the first PST. It was at Otis called Doing It in Public, and it was this like extensive like ephemeral show, a lot of design work, a lot of older photos, and just like a ton of stuff I'd never seen before, even like being in a pretty like liberal art history program, like just realizing it was this like really expansive 20-year history that people have been trying to do and trying and succeeding and failing and trying again to do the same things over and over again. It was like a very inspiring moment, and I think for me that's like more what I hope the archive could be, is like a suggestion or permission or pathway rather than like textual evidence. Yeah.
But even textual stuff and like make it, because I don't know, you guys are all learning about me now, but I hate theory. Yeah. It's so inaccessible to those who don't know much. And so in so many of my classes, I was like, what are we doing? Like, what does this mean? And like, no one likes hearing it. It's like, guys, we get it. But like, what about the people outside of this room? And it was a whole dance of like learning it. And how do I speak about it in a way where people feel like, oh, I know know what that is, and they don't realize it's like Marx or like Foucault or whatever, because they don't know what all that is. And so making like the archive, I think they're all the queer theory behind it tries to mention like gay, private, love. People are like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But they don't realize it's like a historical thing of like being through, you can be straight, it's fine. It's straight as do. But like for me, queer in the booth and like adding to that long history that most don't know about because it is so inaccessible because people have to hide who they were and having the archive. And like I've been trying to access the archives for so long, but I know there's stuff in there, but it's far. But it's a whole thing where it's like, yeah, these like very accessible things exist, but like with the wall of inaccessibility that hides a lot of people or puts like what they call, I forgot the word, but you know, that barrier.
Yeah.
Because if you're an ephemera, I think like memories and like something you can hold or like look at.
What you're both bringing up is also this like slipping between categorizations.
Sorry.
Yeah. I'm getting to like the way that he uses queer acts. It says from the tyranny of identity and instead to think about acts, not identities, queer acts. So there's this like element of moving from fixed notions of representations to moments of resonance. So I have a couple of pieces here that I'll air out and see where they land. But I'm thinking of like what kind of approaches or methods do we? Here's you as one of the co-directors of the center, but how do we practice when we program and consider people's belonging to specific identities? I'm thinking here also, Courtney, as you're saying, these photo booths are in straight spaces, but then as soon as you enter inside of them, they become something else. Or here, how does the Feminist Center consider or is a container of sorts, a place of gathering, begin to facilitate movements and shifts from this tyranny of identity and towards queer acts that subvert conventional or conventions of fixed epistemologies, right? What are some of those practices like that maybe show up in all of our work, whatever our work looks like in the world? That I think also connects to some of his other ideas when he talks about disidentification, that there's this working with and against, right? Like I know the photo booth is in these straight spaces, so I will work with this, but then once I enter, then it becomes something else for me. So what does that space of shifting look like? Or is there methods around making that happen? Or do y'all figure out in your own way how to bring that about?
Anybody? I feel like the act of just queer people in general existing is its own way of like kind of like subverting what the status quo is, whether we're passing or we're not or whatever. I feel like that's like its own act of like defiance, but also like still I think there's a motive where it's like make yourself accessible and accessible to like pretty much assimilate in a way where you're like, I'm gonna like straighten this up to get this money from the government, even though it's like a whole thing of like kind of erasing yourself, but like still trying to hold on to enough. So like you do get like that grant money and you do get like that scholarship, but what have you really once you have it in pocket, like the checkbook where you're like, cool, art. I think just that itself and like applying to these like predominantly not safe spaces for us is probably and mostly how we talk about existing.
Yeah, I think you're also getting to like when he talks about the status of proof and thinking about immigration status right now and forever in this country. Who gets to consider what is proper evidence, what is proper use of thinking about what kind of language and what kind of vocabulary and words we can and cannot use? How do we split between these categorizations so that we're also safe?
I feel some ways in which this is very written in the 90s. Because there are so many ways in which like I find it almost laughable now. The many ways that I like can benefit from like parading around my various identifications, if we're gonna call them that, to get money. as opposed to the idea of pretending to not be doing that, which was, I think that was a different time and a place. And of course there is safety attached to it. Like, of course you're risking your safety, but there is so much other kinds of safety you can get by publicly identifying that I think is different than the time that he's talking about. And I think that there is something about that I was like, I think we're talking about what is a queer act. And I still think his question of identification versus queer acts is a good way to look at things, because I do think that so many identities have been commodified to a point where they are no longer associated with actual people and individual lives. They just have this vague, homogenized gloss over them. So I like the idea of being what are the acts and what do they do? And that's how we're going to identify things, is by the effects of them in a space or among a group of people, rather than whatever we may or may not call them. Because I feel that ends up being more powerful. And if we're thinking about art especially, that I'm we may think that we are asking someone to give us a particular kind of performance, but that may not be what we receive, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking about a case of an artist in Singapore who applied for a grant, posturing a grant as a very much palatable type of proposal, not in any way queer, and then receiving approval for the grant, and then being I'm queer acting, and then having the grant revoked as a result of that. Which is, and it's not it's a reason, and I think about queer acts in an outside of Eurocentric context a lot, because it sort of is you really have to get creative to figure out, or I guess to feel seen, to feel identified, but also negotiate, understanding how to feel seen without being identified. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, that sort of brought that up.
Yeah,
the ephemeral sort of quality of existing as queer, or however that looks or performs or feels, in a place where maybe it isn't commodified yet. It's true, and what that is very ephemeral, I think, actually.
In the complications of naming as well. When do we name? What does it do to name? I'm thinking of some of my workshops and meeting with Alianza, the queer community in Tirana in Albania, when we were working on what do queer words or grammars look like in Albanian, so that we're not always reverting to English and erasing, or not even erasing, but disallowing the possibility of finding other ways of communicating. And one of the members said this word vaguli, which is it means turbulence. And he's I call my internal self vag. And it looks like vag, V-A-G, but it speaks to this fogginess, a space of unknown. And that's what they refer to themselves as internally, which sort of opens up a space of vag can look any which way today and tomorrow and the next day, right? It does not sort of remain in this is what pronouns are, or this is what names look like. It's just a completely different term that really became so generative for us to then continue to tease it out, right? How do we sort of reach for ourselves and for each other through this space of unknown, through this fogginess, right? Which is something that both of you are bringing up, to resist naming, to unname, or if there is any sort of signifier that it does not actually attach to any of these established notions of how we refer to one another.
I love how you said that, because my favorite thing is the whole if you know, you know, if you don't, you don't. And
I'm very oblivious to a lot of things. I like love a certain piece and be like, this is amazing, and it took me years to realize, ooh, that's gay. Like,
Why did I like that so
so
much?
I was like, wow, because I was like, you know, in this big now, whatever. And it becomes a whole thing of like, if you know what's happening, you know, but if you don't, you don't. But like, as a, you know, on a whole, it's like, sorry.
People be gay.
It's not. But like, it's
Well, that's exactly. I thought about your thesis show, like the text message you printed between your mom,
Yeah.
and that it was on this transparent
yeah, like
piece,
Yeah.
right? So there's still like there's both a transparency and opacity to it that creates a state of turbulence of that you're saying, like either you know or you don't know.
And it's also like, you know, it's accessible for those who, you know, like me at one point didn't know, and for those who are like, I see where you're going. I think that's also like a nice transactional, you know, ephemeral kind of thing where it's like, you don't have to explain it if you don't see the point, because there's that whole like, I want this person to buy my piece, but I have to live and yada yada, but I also don't want to like assimilate to the point of like, yeah, heterosexuality kind of thing. But yeah, I love that. The two.
We sort of like, struggle's not even the right word, but like as I think the organization ages and we do, you know, more of these like strategic planning and things like that, we're always like, I think struggling against the sense that like there's, I think often a push to be like, well, if you're running a nonprofit, you want the mission and the like values and the like language to be accessible to everyone. And we're often like, no, not really. I was like, we want it to be a like flag for the people who know and want to be here, and maybe even if they don't know exactly what we're talking about, or at least they want to find out curious and want to find out, rather than like, that it's like, oh, it's something anyone could read and identify. And I think, I don't know if it's like, I think sometimes safety, but I think there's like a queerness to it, or like I don't know. We want people to find something here, but I think there's like has to be a willingness to engage.
Yeah. Well, maybe they can take us to the Venn diagram that you were talking about. This is our friend Maisa.
I'm still awake. I'm sorry.
It's okay. They came from the protests.
Yeah.
And this is Kaya.
Perfect.
And we're talking about queerness and queer acts and possibility.
Cool.
I'm sort of taken to this part of like on togetherness and relation. This element of gathering the program.
Yeah.
Which is the title of the program. Gathering as a space of care, as play. Although maybe you sitting on chairs, on tables is not reflecting, so feel free to inhabit the space however you want. But I'm thinking about this part of like the evolution of the center and programming in relationship to the space, the land, the community, how this sort of like the Venn diagram that you mentioned between its feminist practices.
Oh yeah, there's this Venn diagram that came out of some of our planning work where we were trying to like nail down, name like where we're trying to operate it, and these big circles are creative practice, feminist praxis, and then we're sort of like a queering or something queer, but like I think it's a queer making. I think it's
cool.
Yeah. Is that
How is the language of it? Because it, I mean, kind of like you said, like in some ways, a lot of the things that we're talking about are totally like you can just know them from being in the world.
Yeah.
But then they have names that like other people know through theory, and I don't realize we don't really want to use the theory name because that does feel like too academic, but we then have to invent our own language for like what we mean. And it's been like a long process, and also like we don't always have all the time to be like, let's sit down and think about what's the right wording of what we mean. And we've been in this hilarious conversation with our consultant who like, I think I made this concept into a verb, like queer, actively queer, that's what I said. And she was like, it's just like a partial fragment, and like, why isn't it a noun? Like, she's a problem with it being a verb, but I do think it is like about, again, like it's a queer act, it's something that you're doing.
It is a doing,
It's not like the outcome of it is so important as like the attempt to be queering.
It's in the actual practice.
Yeah, exactly. It's a practice.
Which is also
sort of my desire is, I feel like all my programming are excuses of just being together with people I really respect and love to have these conversations. Because honestly, I mean, being back in school, this is not how conversations are happening in a seminar. You're about to start. Okay, this is not how they happen. It is very fixed. It is very just the stiffness is the stiffness.
It's rigor.
It's It's the performance of it, and sometimes I'm like, what are you actually even saying? Like, can we just talk like a human being? How does this idea that you're talking about show up in real life? And why do you care about it? Why do you want to play with it here?
It's funny, I never saw people, like, I'm no talker, but in seminars, I just sat there. I was like, I'm not contributing to this because all of this, no one knows what we're talking about, no one believes it. So.
Well, and also the looks that you would get, right? Like, there's the one black girl in the room, and
she's
why is she not talking? Right?
Take me, and I'll do it.
Right.
But, yeah, as we were talking about querying the act of it, I think I made a note, but it's less of a desire, more of like a political standpoint of like, I'm outwardly, this is a thing I'm doing, like not just like sexually or whatever. It's like, I am stepping outside of what is the status quo, and I'm standing up for what you all may think is like an identity, but really it's just like a political act of it all. And then like from that bubble is like, sexuality and gender and all that. But it's like really the fluidity of all of it and having the like, I guess the patience with yourself to be fluid, because there are a lot of straight folks who are like very fluid with their politics and very fluid with their existing. And I'm like, you're a good one. Like you actually are breaking down what it is to like not be, I guess, I don't know what the actual word is, because like it keeps going up the string. Hey, let's find maps. Like the binary doesn't exist. It's like you're actually thinking about the in between, which I feel like it's the special space where like those that are doing it, there's like a special language you can't really touch because you're like in community with these people and like you can understand that like a little tiny gray area that allows fluidity of it all, which I think is like a very active like existing.
Well, and also something that you're bringing up is this like part of being patient with yourself. Like as you and I were coming out at the same time. Coming out was so fun. We're coming out at the same time, and then just like the coming out just continues to unfurl. You're like, oh, this is who I am. Oh, this is I might dress this way. Oh, this okay. So there's this like ripples of not just coming out like that you have to do like in public, because I feel like at this point we don't really care to do that, but that how that actually shows up within ourselves. You're like, oh, I had no idea this was also part of me, right? So how do you then remain patient with yourself to then acknowledge those traces that are within you, to then show them care? Does it make sense? Or to see them also as legitimate traces of parts of your queerness, whether they show up for like a week or whatever, right? Like it kind of reminds me of like being a kid and you're like, oh, like time does not matter. I'm like a whole other person today and tomorrow I'm something else. And allowing yourself that space to shape shift. That is like when you exit sort of like for example our home is like this that
I love your home.
No, I don't know. I was talking to my girlfriend and I was laughing because I was talking to my girlfriend earlier and she was like, just remember that person who used to wear fedoras in your 20s is still somewhere deep inside of you. And I was like, it's true.
How dare you bring that person up? By the way, the sad person. I don't know them. We moved past that.
Yeah. You may not see that now, but that person does exist in your personality.
And also the fact that she gave you like that moment, like I see you from every angle. Like you do this, you used to wear a fedora, and top hat, it's okay. But I think also like giving ourselves the permission to really kind of open ourselves up to strangers, because like you guys know too much about me. But like also feeling that feeling like, oh, okay, they are kindred spirits. I can say this and like they'll get it. Whereas in grad school, you're like, I don't think I trust your ideology, so I'm gonna hold back what I really believe, even though it can definitely change. Because it's like you guys haven't heard that. Like, why would I unpack this. And while everyone's saying, I'm like, yeah, I didn't.
Right, when it
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
actually have a place to land.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, just starting working with you both in just the recent years, like every time we like do something, I'm like, oh my God, babe. Like, I'll freak out for days before. I'm like, Vicky, is it enough? Is it good enough? You know? And then I come here and then there's space. So maybe that's something for both of you to share. How do you continue to keep the center in such a way that like both like allows for the seeing of where somebody's coming from while also having a flexible enough sort of structure to expand, right? Like seeing the sort of the work for what it is or whatever you're presented with, while also being flexible enough to see its potentiality or to see its expansion. How do you hold that?
It's an ongoing. I think it's like the challenge, like the fun of the project.
This is too wacky. No.
But we do have parameters, so it's not
Yeah.
always one thing.
And it's not like it's wacky is usually not the.
Yeah.
Wacky could be fun.
So we're good with wacky.
Wacky. I was like, but I do think that's like naming these things and like this is like, and I think thinking like, what is our lane? What are we trying to hold here? Because there's so many artists in LA. We could be doing all sorts. We could be doing all sorts of things. We could be doing a million things. But like, really trying to think about what could we hold well.
Yeah.
Well, the people we have here and the work that we're doing here. And so I think those parameters help us a bit. And
But I think
everyone else, yeah.
what you said earlier, I think your very first question, we were all signed up so you moved past it. Like, how do you create a space so that, I mean, it was like, basically, it's not like an empty space, right? It's not like a neutral space. There are like values and politics to the space, but within it, it's sort of like open-ended, like whatever you want to do with it, we will support you to do it, with the understanding that like we share these values. So like within that realm, then like you could do anything you want. And it will turn into something that we know that we want to support and that we know other people will want to participate in. But I do think it is like each person who comes in to work with us brings their own little universe in here. And then we do have to figure out like which parts of the universe seem like best to share with other people and which are best for our space, because there are also like a lot of other arts and community spaces in LA. So like what part of it is best for like who we know can be here. And also there's like a bunch of unknowns. Like we don't know what people will bring in or who will find this thing like really intriguing or exciting and who will be open to it and who will be changed by it. And that's kind of, we're always looking for the things where like, who will be changed by this? Because that's the best part
of doing it, yeah. And from very early days, we liked really thinking of it as a container that's not just like, yes, that is for some walls, but not just 4 walls in a space, but like all of the people who work here and all of the like information and knowledge and like histories that can come to that space, and like how can that as a container support what is happening. And I think that's how I was trying to show up most days. Yeah, at my best. That's how I tried to show up. Yeah, and how can we hold that? And I think for me, it's the most satisfying part too. We're not very like outcomes driven. We like we want to have good outcomes, but like we're not. I think we really the process is the product. Yeah, we really like the process of doing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the dinner last weekend out there and the process of everyone beautifying the food on the table. Was a performance.
That was really process.
Culinary process, and then everybody was just squirting the the sauces and everything. Just the actual process of it. What happens in the process, and what do you take with you to then like keep that container flexible and fluid and maybe that's not measurable in any specific way, but are the things that like stay with you that you like chew on for a long time that then like make it into the values or the parameters?
Definitely. I would say almost every, like, especially with the artists in residence when they're coming in and working for like a few months at a time and like really going deep on a project and we're in very constant dialogue with them. Like those, I feel like more often than not will evolve and like really stay with the thinking and the like process of the organization. Or I'd say also with relationships too. Like often relationships come in through that then like really like sort of flower after that initial residency period. But
I think there is a lot like to the structure of feeling that we talk about it
Yeah.
here, and like that is what we hold on to, right? So we'll be like, oh, I liked the feeling of like how it was to like participate in eating with our hands with a group of people. Like that was nice, or maybe it wasn't nice. It was like that experience. I didn't like it. And I have to be like, okay, well, how do we incorporate both of these experiences like into our understanding of what this place is and what you do here? So I think that
There's an element of vulnerability there as well.
yeah.
And participating is vulnerable, and that's really, I think, what
Right.
we're often asking of people
Absolutely.
is to like actually participate and as themselves, ideally, like their full selves, ideally, and that that's very vulnerable.
Yeah. And to that point, I know that I've talked a lot, and I wonder if there's like questions that are held in your throats that you want to air out.
I don't know if you answered the question, Sarah, yet, but selfishly, out of your curiosity,
No.
what was that glimmer or memory that you that has maybe not been quote unquote archived materially that maybe can make it in this Zoom?
Yeah. There's some early parts for me around, and I always have a hard time articulating it when I'm like telling the origin story. It becomes like not rote as in it's not. I'm not misleading. Just like there's a version of it you tell, but like very early days around the dinners when we like really we started by hosting these dinners and really thought like 5, 10, maybe 20 people would come, and then like just always being like really like 60 people are gonna come, 100 people are gonna come, which made the like there's like the like uncertainty of logistics and the difficulty of that, but like it felt like something was happening or something like wanted to happen that we were like following a little bit, and that I have no idea how to really do. Like we have the dinner venues and it was like there's photos and they're beautiful, but like I think there's like parts of that, and then early there's like a lot of it's like I think for me, for lots of people, anxiety and excitement have like a very close relationship to each other. But like early days of getting the first space that was on Glover Street was like we had like just enough money in the bank to like do the first and second month, and then like it really had the thing we hoped would happen really had to like work to keep it going, and it was really exciting and also really scary, but like felt like a lot of possibility and potential in that. And like it's like some of that feels hard.
Yeah, because my major question was like, was it exciting? But that's really hard to.
I have such a hard time with excitement. It's something I'm working on now. I have a hard time with like a clean excitement being like a clean boundary, but that doesn't also have like a lot of anxiety.
There's a lot of like before I moved here, one of my like very good friends was working with you. Like a bunch of my friends did this little residency at
Yeah.
They were like, this is all a whole bunch of white people and we're gonna change this or something like that. That wasn't the basis of the residency.
Well, intersectionality now, yes.
So but at the time we had just become friends and they were really excited about the Women's Center. And I remember coming to visit LA on some trip. We went to like a party till like 4 a.m, and then we all like got driven over in my friend's minivan to some like art talk that was happening. And it was just like everyone was so excited to be there. Like no one wanted to miss anything. To the point that we were like, even though we're tired and like we don't know who these artists are, like we have to be there to see them talk, like do an activity together on the deck. Like
and that early days was like everyone had something they wanted it to be, and that felt really like a lot to try to steward, but also like really exciting, and like I don't know, I would say that's like the hard part to like, unless you were there, it feels hard to like reflect.
And how you've stayed open to, because I remember when Phoebe, our friend, was sharing that, okay, well, we want more Black people to work at the center, and then you were like, yes, bring them in, and we want this, yes, bring them in. And so how do you keep yourself open to we started earlier, before this started, but with like critique. How do you keep yourself open to critique? Or maybe it's not necessarily critique, but open to feedback and open to shifting.
So it is critique. I think if somebody is wanting to come to you and critique it and be like, I want it, but I want it to be more of this, and you're like, okay, great, like yes, of course. Like I want more of one person. There were 2 other people when we started. There's a few of us now. It's like it's always been just like a few people, and a few people can only be so much and do so much. And so it's like I think that that's how I try to say is like I try to recognize where it's
like coming from, and I think that's there's like a very much a generosity and like a willingness to do that. And I think what can I do? Like I think it's a responsibility to meet that with like a similar generosity and openness, at least. Yeah, I do.
I think there's also like never really been a sense of ownership. It's not like a single visionary like ownership of it. It's always been a very collective, like just gathering of many different people's interests.
Yeah.
Even from the beginning.
Yeah. No, I mean, in the beginning we had no money to pay anyone to do anything,
Right.
so it was like, do you want to do something here? Great, you can do something here if it's reasonably aligned with what we're doing. So it's always been sort of like a lot of people showing up, and like that cycles through, like who has the capacity then, who's in LA, who's doing it, who wants to do it, and like there's been this kind of like ongoing, like cycle of people, and it's been fun to do this, like looking back on 10 years to like kind of invite some people back who like did something really big at a certain point, and like, with the pandemic there's been less like in-person stuff altogether, obviously, but then like bring them back for this new iteration and see how much everyone's like, the organization, our relationship, like, and them and their practices have like really evolved over that time too. I don't know, there's like a rewarding quality of that.
I hear excitement, Sarah.
I know.
Well, I have one last question, and also, open to everybody's, but something I've been thinking a lot about lately around feminist praxis is to know when we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
How do we, and I'm thinking here with, decolonial thinker Maria Lugones, but she says, how do we know when we're actually doing it? When we're meeting at the intersectional difference or at the colonial difference, right? Like we all inhabit different worlds in life, and we all chose that today we were going to be here together. And how do we know when we're doing the thing? When we're embodying or practicing a feminist practice? Does it make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes Vicky and I, like as we're working on different things together, we're like, oh, we're doing the thing right now. There's understanding and clarity or excitement happening right now. How do you know in your own, whether it's here, whether it's in any of your other work, what are some moments when you feel like, oh, we're doing the thing? It's happening now. Because sometimes it just often goes sort of unnoticed, or going back to the naming, the unnamed. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking, I'm trying to like think of a clear.
Well, it doesn't have to be clear.
No, I think it doesn't have to be clear. I mean, sometimes in the challenge, I think you're doing it. Like, I think I want it to feel always like it's like, yeah, we're doing it. But I think sometimes it's in like you're working against something. But sorry.
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, but like because I think when you're trying to propose alternatives to like a white supremacist, hetero, patriarchy, whatever, like you're often meeting like a rub, like in doing it, and so I think sometimes that's when you're doing it. I want it to feel more sometimes that you're like,
Well, there's almost
it can be both. It can be both. It's like being joyful if you're in
like
the rub.
holding it in place, holding almost like the tension in place, and seeing like, okay, maybe if it doesn't meet here, maybe in those cracks, something emerges in those cracks, and what has now emerged in those maybe decolonial
Well, I
cracks.
think what happens a lot of times when you're in feminist praxis is that there is like a clear, easy path, but what you are choosing to do is to create an entirely separate one.
Yes.
So you're like, okay, we're out here. We got halfway into this like bush area, and now we've encountered a massive pit. Like, how will we go around? Through? What are we gonna do? And I feel like that is what I think. That's what.
And everyone's like, why didn't you do it this way? You're like, well, we're explicitly not doing it that way.
So we invented this other way, and it's also really hard. We need a lot of people, and sometimes we need a lot of resources, but we're gonna really try and do it this way. And so I do feel like sometimes there is friction, but I think that exactly like you're saying, there is like some other kind of work happening where you're inventing, and it feels like a queer act. Like you're inventing a new like way to move through something. And like sometimes you don't really need to reinvent it. Sometimes there are like there's just like small things you can do to make it be feminist practice. And other times you really are like, you have to like remove yourself from the whole system. And that's sometimes extremely difficult and challenging to do.
And sometimes with like running a non-profit space, you're like doing a little cosplay
Right,
on one
exactly,
side and then like
exactly.
doing the other
Like,
thing.
we are this. This is great.
Yeah.
We program a thing that's about how that thing is awesome.
I think it's working when like there's one other person outside of you who's like able to get like, the words and you're like, there's a word here, and I don't know what it is, and someone's like, oh yeah, that's what bananas are. You're like, oh my god, yes. Thank you so much for seeing this thing that comes out with myself from. Or remove yourself so far from it you just can't see what the actual thing was.
Yeah.
And so I think that's how you know you're doing like the thing, because you'll be working forever on a piece of something at the body of work, and it all ties into each other, but you can't figure out that thread because there's so many loose ends. And when like having a studio visit or like having a friend go like, oh yeah, I was like watching this like reality TV show and yada yada yada, and you're like, that's exactly weirdly what I'm doing and what I've been doing, and then you have that, oh yeah, that's feminist.
Well, there's all it brings it back to like a resonance. Well, not that, but it brings it to resonance. I was just like brought to the moment you and I first laid eyes on each other.
I was alone. It was literally the first
Because
interaction.
sometimes it's also I'm like it's not named. It just like there is this resonance between bodies, this knowing, right? Like
It's not
you and I would just look at each other. We're like, we
That's
don't
right.
need to say it in English words. We just know that we are in understanding, and this is bullshit.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That there are times when it feels like the hard thing Sarah is saying, and there are other times when it just feels like very right, like very somatically, and you don't have to try very hard. And that's when you're like, oh, this is correct.
I think that's why it's lasted 10 years for you guys. Like, you probably don't know what it is. You're like, there's something here and you don't know, but you're still like, because a lot of nonprofits are like, I'm gonna close the doors because like, I got $1.50, but that's for my coffee. That's like $10.50. Like, cannot. So the fact because you're able to like maintain something and like just on that like trust that someone will show up. Like you mentioned your dinners and you thought like 60 people show up. It's like even one other person, you're like, that's one person who isn't me. And I feel like,
and that's what it feels like it's working when you're like, oh, people want to come and hang out and do the thing and do something together, and that feels like that is definitely what most feels like. It's working somatically. That's what it feels really good. Yeah, that's what it feels good. Uncomplicated.
Uncomplicated,
Less complicated.
Because I'm like, I think this Silvi's question could be flipped also. It's like now at this point I feel very lucky to have got to make lots of choices where now I feel the difference when I'm doing something unfeminist or I feel like something is too heterosexual and I can't do it. That's what I'm noticing instead of the other way around.
Well, my wife makes fun of me because I like live in this feels like, because this is my work and I live in the stubble and like and she's like, you hardly even know men. And I was like, I guess that's true. That's not even true.
That's a person here. I don't want to. Like, wish you all would like, you're not.
And sometimes I'm like saying, how I think something should be based on that like lived experience. She's like, you don't like you live in this like really weird bubble. It's like, I guess that's
jealous. But you don't even shirt. You don't even know. They're there. There's teeth in the
It's not entirely true. It's more harassing me, but
Well, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Is there anything else that we can continue to chitty chat, as my niece says. But is there anything else we want to?
I guess to the last question I was thinking about. I've been thinking a lot lately about how much time and energy I spend on creating versus resisting. Because I feel like relating and creating under capitalism, you need to do some amount of resisting. If you don't, then you're, I guess, complicit. Or if you're only creating, then also you're probably complicit. And I feel like the times when I feel like I'm doing more resisting than creating, I'm also like shrinking. And how it kind of like the semantics of kind of experiencing these two things on like different ratios at different times. And also, I was thinking with the conversation about immigration, because I'm also in an immigration limbo of like applying for an artist visa and having to kind of like negotiate the words that I use in my application. Like, I'm not gonna say
Improve.
I'm not gonna say, yeah.
Prove that your work is legitimate enough for you to
Yeah, the validity of being a person who's creating under this kind of regime. And the evidence, right? Evidence of that, evidence of yourself doing all of these things under the structure. Yeah.
Yeah, when you began sharing, I was thinking about both you and Ricky, because both of you are about to go back to your homes because of that tension of it's not feasible, right, for either of you to be here in the States and to continue to prove that you could be here. That right, Vicky was in the same situation of like proving to be an extraordinary alien is what that visa is called.
But also like a celebrity in a way. Like you need to have press coverage.
Yeah.
Like you have to be a celebrity. Basically.
Yeah, to that there's also like thinking about being in California and Hollywood.
Yeah.
And Hollywood as this propaganda of being creative and the language that this visa uses. But like I got like this request for further evidence of my case, and then they said something like, how does being an art teacher put you in a starring role?
It's like the bar is getting Oscars. That's like
and the examples are like, it could be an Academy Award or like
exactly. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Bananas. Like.
Notice for further evidence.
Request for
requests. Yeah.
We got that one. But
yeah.
Didn't ask if I had an Oscar.
You didn't reply?
We did, we just.
But also there was a moment where they needed to know if my citizenship was legitimate enough for me to be a sponsor for your legitimacy of status. So it's just really interesting to, especially today you also.
Can I share what I did that was feminist in regards to the visa? I organized a workshop where it was like intro to coding because I'm a web developer and a researcher, and I was encouraging participants to create fake press.
I love
that. So I had to submit like 12 letters of references, and then all of them were drafted by my lawyer. And it's interesting to think that one person drafting all these letters, because he's the only one who knows what language to use. Right? And then I did this thing the other day where I asked AI to write a bunch of letters, and then it did the same thing in like 5 seconds. And so it's interesting this AI as an entity also in relation to the state and how that kind of like surveils our sort of
And they're so weirdly worded because I've done stuff for some artists and I'm just like, this is never what I would say about them. But fine, if this is what you needed to say, it's fine.
But that's so cool.
Yeah, I was encouraging them not to use as a legal document in the application. Let's face it. But it's a discussion.
It's legal sense.
Discussion. Like that's exactly what we're talking about. Like, can governments actually read the code? Because every website on the browser, you can, if you right click and inspect, you can see the code. So then the question is like, would they be able to see that the code was stripped from the original platform, and identify that it's not coming from their original domain?
You guys know this before or not?
I think they're not. That's what I think they'll find out in 20 years, and then it would be caught.
Yeah, like if there was an AI model that was detecting what you're talking about, if it was looking for copy and paste source code, and then it could find those. But I seriously doubt they have anything like that.
Well, they're too busy using money elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, digitally terraforming the
White House
website where the Constitution has also been removed, among other material. So really interesting to think about.
I love this.
Who is asking who
Like
is
they're trying
legitimate?
to queer world build too.
Yeah, that's right. They're queer.
It's also interesting because I think like a friend of mine who was also doing the same process a couple of years ago had like a statement about like Palestine, and she asked her lawyer if this was okay, and they're like, this is totally fine, you know. And it's interesting how the same entity asks for different things and uses these like specific rules and guidelines to kind of place you in a position. Yeah, that was just interesting. That like, they're also not like smart. Like they don't really like, I guess, think critically through like you as an artist writing the statement, but they just want to hear things like fabulous and extraordinary. Those are things they want to hear.
Like who gets to be a legitimate body?
Right.
Yeah.
Lawyers.
And I was lawyers and performing being people who like admire and love you.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess like to the last question, the I think it's this sort of alchemizing of this resistance and creation, like both happening at the same time, that to make sure that you're not shrinking with too much of it, or like you're not just creating and not resisting and like limiting your body. Yeah. So I think it's that. So I think
There's this dissonance that I think is coming up. I was just writing about this the other day on the digital terraforming on top of the physical terraforming that is happening. And when I say terraforming, is the shifting of the earth, the shifting of the body. In Palestine and in Gaza, and in Google Maps, they updated the images, and the images of Gaza show up as these deteriorated places. But if you click on any previously existing establishment, it shows it has like fields with lemons and olive groves. So then on the same page of the screen, you see the horror and the life that once lived. And it's, I mean, there's more horrific things, but for it to just exist on that same page, I think is also what some of the things we're bringing up. How do we hold these, what Sylvia Winters calls complexities of being within our own bodies, the contradictions within ourselves. Yeah, I think it comes back to some of that patience or presence, thinking back to just like maybe in the closing of some of the things that we were offering in this gathering together. You did great with active listening.
Oh, thank you.
The presence, the good vibes. Yeah. And I'm very grateful for all of you who decided to come and be together.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any last closing pieces?
I thought everyone's comments were wonderful. When you're talking about space, I have an architecture background, so I was very much trying hard not to think about the actual but also I was thinking about in architecture, but also socially, we think about life, your private life and your public life. So a lot of architecture is very like, oh, you're doing residential or commercial. You're either doing it for public or private. And I was lucky, at least my professor my last year, he was like, I don't believe in that, like that there's private and public separation to everything. And you think about queer acts or queer ways of living, and it is very like intertwined, your public and your private life. And when I was doing my final thesis project, I was trying to think about how as architects, can we make space, physical space, for queer people, and what would that look like? Is it to support queer acts? What are queer acts? Isn't being queer just like everything? Is everything to be queer? And I read like this other book, The Cruising Utopia, with parts of it. But that is that aspect of it's like public sex, or is it going out, but I didn't want to pigeonhole, and I really struggled to think about physically what is queer space. So I also used queering as my title, because I couldn't think about like what other words to use. Yes. Well, Sam,
We did so much like lit review together.
yeah.
That was fun. But also, I guess I was so surprised about like your experience going to USC and mine going to UCLA, and kind of like how they value education, or like there was so much censorship happening with your project. There, like your professor was trying to like cut it from the beginning, trying to censor you. I remember you were talking to me about it, and I was like,
I think there wasn't enough rigor.
And the thing is, it's like compared to your other classmates, you had to put in like more rigor, more evidence of what that is, to cite more literature to make it more valid, because they haven't done the work already to understand it. They didn't have the language or the embodied knowledge or the experience to even situate your perspective in theirs, and that was like frustrating as someone who was like, no, this makes complete like sense. I don't understand why they're not like making, like they don't understand it.
Because I don't want to understand it. That's I'm not too sorry. It's just when I hear that, it makes me so sad about where people have to like literally like, here's the entire history of what it means to be a person and also a gay person. Because people just don't want to, or they want to scare you to the point of like having to get out of the program because they don't really want to change what they're doing. And I think that's so kudos to you. Be like, oh, here's my entire here you go, you're a major
design space.
Yes, so that's what I struggle with, is like designing a singular thing.
Yeah.
So I designed like 4 things because it was really difficult, because I was thinking about your comment of like, if you know, you know, like that was kind of one typology of it's being outwardly, sometimes you can't be super outwardly queer, so there's like queer camouflage, and if you know that it's a queer place, then you know. So there's like different ways of entering buildings, or the way that the facade is done. Those were some of the kind of typologies I was trying to implement, and there's more of like an outwardly very like over the top queer typology. But I kind of, as I was making all of these, I was realizing that it's infinite. Yeah, you could go on forever. And what I appreciate about the Feminist Center space is that it's very flexible, and that was like a through line between all of the designs, was the queerness is so like, it ebbs and flows, and there's so many different ways to be queer that you need to make a space that supports it. And that you can do physically. So at the end,
I do think it's like that's like a like a space for turbulence.
Yeah.
like houses and spas.
I have a question for us to like put a bow on it. As we close it, maybe we can go the other way around, and we can say our names again, and maybe we can share what is a queer act that we want to reflect out into the world, right? Because we gathered in the center here today for a couple of hours, and then we will go on in whatever we want to do. What is something that we're continuing to take with us, to continue to chew on, that we want to reflect out in the world? So my name is Silvi again, and something I want to radiate out is queer joy. Yeah.
I'm Sarah, still. And I want to keep making weird spaces where queer things can happen.
My name is Kaisa. I guess that's weird to not question the order of things. It's something that I actively do.
My name is Sam, and I feel like being queer is also being a saboteur, like knowing your environment and changing it within, with the knowledge of these are the structures and the status quo that uphold it, but I can use that language and subvert it in order to make my identity and presence known.
I'm Isabella. I just want to use the word queering again.
I'm Kamala. I think I don't know if it's radiating outward, but I want to hold the complexities and the hypocrisies that are contained in a person.
Trevor. Also not sure if it's well, it'll radiate at some point somehow. But the idea of I really like that idea of turbulence as like a queer act, or like that, because I usually think of it as like a negative thing that has to be contained rather than something that can somehow, I don't know. I don't have language for it. Like the idea of a space that's built for turbulence, and like even if that space is your body.
You're all saying good things. My name is Courtney, and the way I've been doing things lately has been like just desire and like pleasure and like letting that live in my life and my body as the world just like, just does this existing thing, because I find it hard to like find pleasure and desire and not being ashamed of said pleasure and desire.
My name's Ramona. I guess I'm just thinking about how I spend a lot of time walking. I don't have a car, and I work late at night, so I'm often walking late at night. And there's not a lot of people out in general, but definitely no one like me out there usually. And I don't know, that in itself kind of feels like you're in a space where maybe they think you shouldn't be. And it feels good. I like it, even though people are like, oh, you shouldn't do that, it's dangerous, whatever. I like being in that space. It feels like I'm doing something, I don't know. Yeah.
My name is Vicky. I don't know if this is like radiatable, but I will bring out. I want to embrace simultaneity, similar, and like turbulence. Sort of just holding space for my own simultaneity and for other people's simultaneity to exist, not binaries. Yeah.
I think Amiga, and I think I was thinking of turbulence also, and how to sort of keep turbulating even when it's not acceptable or something like that.
Hi, Vicky. I'm gonna go back to my country, China, soon, which is the country still being queer and legal there. So I'm gonna keep trying to make sure like people in China can be what they want to be and love what you want to love.
I'm just so grateful. Thank you so much.